Hello and welcome to the car project tutorial where we work with multiple render layers from 3D files. So in this project I'm just going to show you how to basically use the blending modes for advanced compositing from exported 3D files render layers. So let's go ahead and get started by going to the file, import, and from your After Effects DVD or from the desktop from doing the download, you should on your desktop have the car project folder, which should have the backplate, car shadow, diffuse, occlusion, reflection, road shadow, and the specular. Here I've also included a sample video file so that you can see more or less what the final project should look like. And the biggest thing that I've seen here is from previous students who have done this in the past is typically it's usually the occlusion or the shadow layer that seems to have a problem. So again, if you're ever not sure what the final project should look like, always use the sample as an estimate for what that should look like at the base level. If there's more you'd like to add to it or make adjustments, sort of spruce it up, make it your own, you're more than welcome to do that. However, at baseline, the finished project should look something like this. So the first thing I'm going to do to get this project started off is import our backplate. So this would be our background image. I've gone ahead and exported this as an image sequence as well, which it could actually just be a QuickTime movie file, but in this case I re-rendered it out of After Effects as an image sequence because the original footage was HD, and that's why HD is included in here. However, in order to fit it on our DVD, I had to actually downgrade the resolution to 720 by 480, which is NTSC quality. So again, just a little refresher. For importing image sequences, always make sure to just select the first sequence, or the first image in the sequence, and then just make sure it says target sequence or TIFF sequence or whatever type of sequence it is that you're bringing in. By default, this should be checked on in After Effects. So I'm going to go ahead and hit open. Now for our backplate, I'm just going to go ahead and hit straight unmatted. I don't need to pre-multiply this because this has no alpha channel that I need to be concerned with. And then let's go ahead and import the rest of our files as well. So I'm just going to back out of this. I'll do the next one, car shadow. So I'll select the first file, again, target sequence, and hit open. This time, however, I'm going to make sure to check pre-multiplied matte with the color black, because I want to make sure it's taking out our black edges. So I'm going to hit OK, and for the rest of these files, everything else in here, except for the backplate, I want to make sure everything is pre-multiplied. So again, let's go ahead and bring in diffuse, pre-multiplied, okay. A couple different files to bring in here. Occlusion. Our reflection, the road shadow, and finally we have our specular layer. So you can see if you're working with a 3D artist, or if you yourself are creating files in a 3D program such as Maya, 3D Studio Max, Lightwave, Blender, any of these programs, and you're exporting files to be composited afterwards into After Effects, I highly recommend rendering out your files using render layers. The reason that you would want to do this is because it's going to separate all the different aspects that make up your image, but will basically give you more control over how you're going to manipulate that image, or if you have to do any color correcting or adjust the 3D image to match your backplate. It's going to be a lot easier and give you more control over what it is that you can do. So you can see here when I've done a full multi render layer pass, I have car shadow, which is the shadow on the car, a diffuse layer. Diffuse basically is like your color pass, so the base color on the image. Full color reflection, or full car reflection. This is the reflection that you see on the car from the outside world. Occlusion pass, this is kind of sometimes called the dirt pass, which is basically a layer that will include some grit, a little bit of grain, and this layer is actually something that in the last couple of years in 3D has become something that's absolutely critical. It's not something that was always used that commonly, but probably within about the last 4 years it's become like the rave of the 3D world. Basically, if you don't have an occlusion pass, you might as well not even be rendering something that's going to be composited with something realistic. Even very cartoony style 3D images are using occlusion now. So basically, occlusion is, think of it as like a dirt layer, like a grain layer for a film plate. Road shadow is the shadow that the car is casting onto the road. And finally, the specular is sort of like the main highlights that are going to be showing up on the car. Based on the position of the light, will tell the 3D program where it is that the highlights are supposed to show up on the car, and then also based on the curves and the shape of that image. So we have a lot of different layers here. That gives us about 6 different layers to do a full render layer pass. So to get this started, I'm going to go ahead and put the backplate into the timeline. And the reason I'm just dropping this in as opposed to creating a composition first, because I know this backplate has all the parameters that I would like to match all of the rest of my layers to. So I'm just dropping this in and letting it tell After Effects which settings to create. So here I can even double check, make sure it's 720 by 480, it's 30 frames per second, and then you can see the duration here as well. Just go ahead and hit OK. If I want, I can rename the composition, so I can call this Car Project, for example. And now you can see my timeline here says Car Project. So I can also save this. So I make sure that I am creating a file. Here I can do it under Desktop, Car Project, so it's under the same place. And now here at the top where I don't have an asterisk, that tells me that this is the newest file of this version that I have. Okay, so if I go ahead and scrub through this, I can see what this film footage looks like. Now the only problem here, I'm going to go ahead and close these controls while I work so I can get a little bit more space for my composition window. Is one thing that we haven't quite covered is talking about how to get rid of interlaced footage. So if you're working with a digital camera, often what will happen is your footage will get interlaced, which basically means it's going to look like you have a pixelated shot, particularly when there's fast motion. You can really see it on this guy with the bicycle. He looks extremely choppy, and instead of giving a motion blur look, it almost looks like he's got some weird double pixelation issues going on. So I'm just going to go and scroll to this part of the clip, somewhere around 2 seconds and 27 frames, so that you can see where the worst part of that interlacing footage is happening. So in order to fix this, and this is something that you always want to fix before you start putting in your 3D files, is always fix the interlacing. I'm going to select the backplate layer under the Project panel and go to File, Interpret Footage, Main. Now under here we have an option that's called Fields and Pull Down, and under Separate Fields it's automatically set to off, but I'm going to go ahead and use the drop down and select Lower Field first. I'll also go ahead and hit Preserve Edges to Best Quality Only, and I'm going to hit OK. Now immediately what you see here is this image gets a lot, it sort of combines it and gets rid of our nasty pixelation and gives us a little bit more of an actual blurred look. So you can see if I go back to off, just pay attention to the guy over here in the right side of the screen. If I turn this to off and hit OK, see how that changed drastically there? Let's make sure we have that selected. Alright, so let me go ahead and turn that back on now that you're paying attention to it. Again, I'm going to hit upper field first, and then once I hit OK, you'll see this image immediately change from pixelated to something that looks a little bit more like he's just being blurred from a motion blur action. Okay, so now that we have that fixed, let's go ahead and start dropping in our render layers for our car. So this is our backplate. That means it's going to be the bottom layer. The first thing I'm going to start with is the diffuse layer, since this is our color layer. I'm going to go ahead and grab this and drop it in as the top layer.